History is full of figures that have been elevated to legendary status. People like Genghis Khan, Napoleon, Julius Caesar, Alexander the Great, and yes, even Elvis. But are these stories true? Well, that's up for debate, because there's a lot of questionable stuff out there about some of history's most famous people. It's me. And let's jump in. Genghis Khan is often regarded as one of the greatest conquerors in history. According to legend, he was born in 1162 in the Mongolian steppe. As a young man, he united many of the tribes of the Mongolian steppe under his banner and went on to found the largest contiguous land empire in history. He was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 40 million people, but did any of this really happen? Well, there is some evidence to suggest that it might have been a bit of a combination. Most historians agree that the Mongols did unite under a guy named Temujin, who later took the title of Genghis Khan, which means ocean-going conqueror. But there is very little evidence that he was actually born in 1160-something, or that he was even called In fact, the name Genghis Khan was unused during his lifetime, and the earliest record we have of the name comes from a Chinese text written almost 300 years after he died. This has led some historians to question whether or not Genghis Khan actually existed at all. It is possible that the legendary figure of Genghis Khan is actually a combination of several different Mongol leaders, or maybe he was just made up by the Chinese to make them look better. We know that the Mongols were a powerful force in the 13th century, and they did conquer a huge chunk of Asia and Eastern Europe, but it's possible that we've been misinformed about who was really in charge. And speaking of legendary conquerors, what about Alexander the Great? Alexander III of Macedon, better known as Alexander the Great, is considered one of the most successful military commanders in history. He conquered the Persian Empire and extended his empire as far east as India. He was known for his military genius and his ability to inspire his troops to great feats of bravery. However, recent research has cast some doubt on these accounts. Alexander the Great died in 323 BC, and one of his generals, Ptolemy I, became the ruler of Egypt. Shortly after Alexander's death, Ptolemy commissioned a number of historians to write accounts of Alexander's life. These histories were highly idealized and portrayed Alexander as a godlike figure, so it's no surprise that modern historians are a bit skeptical of them. In recent years, researchers have uncovered a number of new historical sources that provide a more realistic portrait of Alexander the Great. These sources are much closer to the time period in which Alexander lived, and they offer a more balanced view of his character and accomplishments. They paint a picture of a brilliant but ruthless military commander who was sometimes reckless and irresponsible. One of the most shocking revelations about Alexander the Great is that he may not have even been Greek. You see, back in the day, the Greeks didn't really have a concept of race the way we do today. But when Alexander conquered the Persian Empire, he did take on many Persian wives, and some historians believe that one of these women may have actually been Alexander's mother. If this is true, then Alexander would have had Persian blood, which would have made him even more unpopular with the Greeks. Another surprising fact about Alexander the Great is that he was actually shorter than average for a Macedonian man. According to a recent study, he was only about 5 feet tall. That's about half an inch shorter than the average American male today. Alexander's supposed height has been a source of much debate and speculation throughout history. Some historians have claimed that he was actually 6 feet tall, while others have argued that he was closer to 4 feet 11. The truth is that we don't really know how tall Alexander was, but it is safe to say that he was the towering figure that many people believe him to be. So Alexander the Great may not have been Greek, and he may not have been as tall as everyone thinks he was. But was he really as invincible as they say? Well, maybe not. According to legend, Napoleon Bonaparte was born in 1769 on the island of Corsica. He rose to prominence during the French Revolution and eventually became Emperor of France. He waged war against much of Europe, but was eventually defeated and exiled to the island of St. Helena in the Atlantic Ocean, where he died in 1821. However, recent research has challenged some of these well-established facts about Napoleon's life. Napoleon's birth year is known as 1769. But in 2016, a group of French historians came forward with new evidence suggesting that he was actually born in 1768. They based their claim on a number of factors, including a discrepancy in the records of Napoleon's baptism. There are also some doubts about the location of Napoleon's birthplace. According to tradition, he was born in the city of Aix, but some historians believe that he may have actually been born in the nearby village of Biserta. There is even some debate over whether or not Napoleon was really born on the island of Corsica at all. You see, Corsica was a part of the Republic of Pisa at the time of Napoleon's birth, but it was also claimed by the Kingdom of Sardinia. Some historians argue that Napoleon's birthplace is actually in modern-day Italy. Of course, the most famous myth about Napoleon is that he was short. It's a common misconception that Napoleon was only about 5 feet 2 inches tall, which would have made him shorter than average, even for the time period. However, recent research has shown that this is not true. Napoleon was actually closer to 5 feet 6 inches tall, which would have been above average for the time period. The myth likely originated from a mismeasurement during the autopsy performed on Napoleon's body after his death. So Napoleon wasn't short, but he wasn't exactly a giant either, and he probably was even born in the year 1769. But if none of these claims can be substantiated, then what can we say for certain about Napoleon? Well, we do know that he was a brilliant military commander and one of the most important figures in European history. But what about some more modern legends? Marilyn Monroe is often regarded as the most famous sex symbol of the 20th century. She was known for her curvaceous figure, her breathy voice, and her comedic timing. But was she really the dumb blonde bombshell that the media portrayed her to be? Well, it turns out that Marilyn Monroe was actually a lot more than just a pretty face. She was a talented actress and comedian who was also very intelligent. In fact, she was a voracious reader and she was fluent in multiple languages. She was also very interested in politics and current events. And she was a major supporter of the civil rights movement. But perhaps the most surprising thing about Marilyn Monroe is that she was not actually born Marilyn Monroe at all. Her birth name was Norma Jean Mortensen, and she changed her name when she began acting. She also had a number of different aliases that she used throughout her life, including Norma Jean Baker, Norma Jean Doherty, Miller, and Mona. James Monroe was the 7th President of the United States, but before he entered politics, he served in the military. In fact, he was one of the founding members of the United States Marine Corps. He was also the first president to live in the White House. But did you know that James Monroe was actually a spy? During the Revolutionary War, Monroe served as an aide to General George Washington. But when Washington was forced to flee New York City in 1776, Monroe was captured by the British and imprisoned. While he was in prison, Monroe was visited by a British intelligence officer who offered him a deal. If Monroe agreed to spy on the Continental Army for the British, he would be released from prison. Monroe accepted the offer, and he spied on the Americans until 1779, when he was caught and sentenced to death. However, his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment, and he was eventually released in 1783. But James Monroe wasn't the only American president who had a secret past. Abraham Lincoln is regarded by many as the greatest American president. He led the country through the Civil War and helped to abolish slavery. But did you know that Lincoln had a secret, illegitimate son? In 2011, a man named Robert Lincoln Beck claimed that he was the son of Abraham Lincoln, and a woman named Elizabeth Keckley. Beck said that he was born in 1850 and that his mother worked as a seamstress for Mary Todd Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's wife. Keckley had an affair with President Lincoln, but she was never able to confirm it, and she didn't even tell anyone that she had a son until she was more than 60 years old. Beck's claim was backed up by DNA testing, but it's still not 100% proof that he's Lincoln's son. But here's the crazy part. Abraham Lincoln probably knew that Robert Beck was his son, and he even helped to support him financially for a time. However, he never publicly acknowledged Beck as his son, and he refused to allow him to use the Lincoln name. What about more modern times? Elvis Presley is often referred to as the king of rock and roll. He was known for his energetic performances and his unique blend of musical styles. But what was the real Elvis like? Well, it turns out that he was a lot different from the onstage persona that he cultivated. For example, Elvis was actually very shy off stage, and he was known for being extremely polite and respectful to elders. He was also a devout Christian and a lifelong member of the Church of Christ. Elvis was also a big fan of horror movies, and he collected a number of creepy souvenirs, including a shrunken human head. But perhaps the most shocking fact about Elvis is that he was actually inducted into the military, even though he had managed to avoid the draft several times. In 1954, Elvis was drafted into the US Army, and he served 2 years in Germany. It was during his time in the military that he met Priscilla Ballou, who would later become his wife. Elvis's time in the military was controversial, to say the least. Many people believed that he was using his fame to get out of serving in Korea, and they were not happy about it. But Elvis actually did serve in Korea, even though it was not officially recognized at the time. When he returned home, he was a hero to many, and he used his fame to help promote the military. So what about more recent times? John F. Kennedy is a legendary figure in American history. He was the youngest person ever elected President of the United States, and he was also the first Roman Catholic president. He was assassinated in 1963, and his death is one of the most controversial events in American history. But did any of it really happen? Well, according to a new theory, John F. Kennedy was actually killed by the CIA. The theory is based on the fact that JFK was considering the removal of some of the top CIA officials following the failed Bay of Pigs invasion. This move would have effectively neutered the organization, and CIA Director Allen Dulles was not happy about it. So he and a few other high-ranking officials hatched a plan to assassinate the president. The problem was that they couldn't agree on how to pull it off. Some wanted to use a sniper, but others thought that it would be better to bomb the president's plane. In the end, they decided to go with the plane bombing option, but it didn't work out the way they planned. The plane was indeed bombed, but JFK survived the attack. However, he was killed a few months later in Dallas, Texas, by a sniper. So what do you think? Are any of these legends just myths? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.